Today we're looking at a quiet but important escalation in the Black Sea. In the last few days, Ukrainian naval drones have not only gone after Russian ports and warships, but for the first time they've struck the tankers that help move Russia's sanctioned oil. This is the so-called Shadow Fleet. Two of those ships were hit in the Black Sea inside Turkey's exclusive economic zone, and a separate strike damaged a key export terminal near Novorossiysk. On the surface, this is another drone attack, but underneath, it's a shift in how the war touches global energy, neutral countries, and maritime security. Let's break down what actually happened, what the Shadow Fleet is, and why this matters far beyond Ukraine and Russia. So over the weekend, Ukrainian authorities confirmed that they had in fact used basically two drones, uncrewed surface vessels. These are the Sea Baby family of naval drones, and they struck two Russian-linked oil tankers in the Black Sea. The first ship was a tanker called Kairos. It was hit badly enough that a fire broke out on board, and the crew had to be evacuated. 25 sailors were taken off the ship. As of the last reading that I did, no deaths had been reported so far. The second vessel, Virat, was also hit multiple times. Again, it was damaged. It seems to have stayed afloat, and its crew, at least from what I've seen, hasn't had to abandon ship. Both attacks took place in international waters, but inside Turkey's exclusive economic zone. So legally speaking, this wasn't an attack in Turkish territorial waters, but it did happen in an area where Turkey has special rights over resources and economic activity. Almost in parallel, another Ukrainian drone strike hit the Black Sea terminal of the Caspian Pipeline Consortium at Novorossiysk. That's the main export route for Kazakh crude that passes through Russia. One of the loading points was damaged badly enough that exports were temporarily halted. And if you haven't seen the video, definitely go check it out. It's pretty wild. You see the drone coming in, the camera kind of pans with it, you see the attack, the explosion, and etc. This is a terrible pun, but it was very powerful. And I definitely think you should check it out. Regardless, in just a few days, Ukraine went after three connected targets, two tankers at sea and one major export terminal on land, all tied into Russia's energy export system. And so to understand why these targets matter, we need to talk about the Shadow Fleet. When Western governments put price caps and sanctions on Russian oil, Moscow started relying on a loose network of older tankers, often sailing under flags of convenience, insured in less than transparent ways, and operated through shell companies. And the job of these ships is to keep Russian oil flowing while trying to stay just outside the reach of formal sanctions enforcement. They're often poorly maintained, lightly insured, and they tend to use tactics like ship-to-ship transfers and irregular AIS patterns to obscure where the cargo is coming from and ultimately where it's going. The two tankers hit in this operation, they don't look like random civilian ships caught in the crossfire. They appear on sanctions lists and in open source databases that track vessels suspected of helping Russia move sanctioned crude. So from Ukraine's point of view, that's the key. Kyiv is sending a message. If you're a ship participating in this shadow logistics network, moving Russian oil and helping to generate revenue for the war, you're not a neutral bystander. You're a part of the war economy, and you may become a target. That logic, however, runs straight into another layer of reality, and that's other countries' interests. Turkey reacted quickly and publicly. Its foreign minister condemned the strikes, said they endangered navigation, human life, property, the environment in the Black Sea. Okay. Ankara stressed that the attacks took place inside its exclusive economic zone and said it had to deploy assets for search and rescue and for maritime safety. Fair enough. But that doesn't mean Turkey is suddenly taking Russia's side. Ankara has been trying to balance its role as a NATO member, a gatekeeper for the Bosphorus and Dardanelles, and a country that still does significant business with Moscow. Are they conflicted? What does it look like? Like, what is their role as a NATO member? Feel free to comment below and get that conversation started. That's a good one. It does show where Turkey's red lines are. It wants the war contained. It doesn't want naval drone warfare spilling over into areas it regards as its backyard, especially when those attacks raise the risk of oil spills, shipping incidents, or broader instability in the Black Sea. So from Ankara's perspective, it's less about who owns the cargo and more about the precedent, right? If Ukrainian drones can hit sanctioned tankers here today, what stops similar strikes by anyone on other shipping tomorrow or moving forward? The reaction by Kazakhstan highlights a slightly different tension. So this consortium, the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, it's the export system that was hit at Novorossiysk. This is a joint venture. Kazakhstan relies heavily on it to move its oil to global markets. Russia, of course, is a major stakeholder. But Western companies like Chevron and others are also involved. When a Ukrainian drone heavily damaged one of CPC's loading points and exports were briefly halted, Kazakhstan protested. Officials in Astana called it an attack on civilian economic infrastructure, warned that it could strain their relationship with Ukraine. For Ukraine, the logic is similar to the tanker strikes. Russia earns money and influence from these flows, and degrading that capacity is one way to reduce its ability to fund the war. For Kazakhstan, the picture looks different. They're not at war with Ukraine. They're trying to balance relations with both Moscow and the West, and they don't want to see their main export artery turned into a regular target in someone else's conflict. And then there are the global markets. CPC moves over 1% of global oil supply, and that's not nothing. Even short disruptions can ripple out, right? Prices go up, insurance costs, risk models for companies and shippers that have no direct role in the war at all. Basically, that affects us. But if we step back, these strikes are part of a broader pattern in how Ukraine has adapted to Russian naval dominance. Think about it. Over the past 2 years, Kyiv has used naval drones. They've pushed much of Russia's Black Sea fleet away from Crimea. They've targeted dry docks, landing ships, logistics hubs in Sevastopol, other places along the coast. They're protecting their own grain corridor. They're hitting oil depots, refineries, things that are supporting Russia's war machine. So these attacks, the 2 ships in the terminal, they take that approach one step further. And they move beyond strictly military shipping and port infrastructure and go after the commercial vessels and shared infrastructure that, in Ukraine's view, extend Russia's ability to sell oil and fund the war. The message is distance and ambiguity won't guarantee safety anymore. If you're moving Russian oil, even under a different flag, even with a different company name, your risk profile just went up. There's likely a few implications here, and it's worth being clear that these are my assessments. These are not certainties. But first, I think we can expect higher insurance premiums, stricter routing guidelines for tankers operating near the northern Black Sea, especially for ships that appear on sanctions lists or operate in the gray zone of the shadow fleet. Obviously, that can make it more expensive and more complicated for Russia to move oil, even if most ships are never attacked. Second, there's a real chance of friction with partners and neighbors. Turkey and Kazakhstan don't want to see the Black Sea or Novorossiysk turn into a standard battleground for economic warfare. Even if they understand Ukraine's logic, they may pressure Kyiv, either quietly, maybe publicly, to narrow its target set, or at least coordinate more closely. Third, this may encourage other countries to tighten their own enforcement on the shadow fleet. Good. If coastal states and insurers decide that certain ships are just too risky to host or to cover, that could hurt Russia more than the physical damage from any single drone strike. But there's also the risk of miscalculation. Naval drones don't always hit exactly what they're aimed at. So if a future attack damages a third country vessel with no connection to Russia or causes a major spill, that diplomatic cost could be high. So the bottom line is that this isn't just another headline about drones and explosions. Ukraine is slowly expanding its maritime campaign from warships and ports to that wider ecosystem that keeps Russian oil moving. Tankers, terminals, the gray zone networks in between. That puts pressure on Russia's revenue. But it also drags in countries like Turkey and Kazakhstan and raises the risk for everyone using the Black Sea. We'll see in the coming weeks whether this was a one-off warning shot or if it was the start of a sustained campaign against the shadow fleet. For now, it's a reminder that in modern war, the front line doesn't stop at the edge of the battlefield. It runs through shipping lanes, insurance contracts, and the quiet tankers that move the world's energy every day.